Did the NFL just send a message to Shedeur Sanders and Deion Sanders and say, you don't run the league, we do? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba. Today's episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. We're also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you guys for making me your first listen. If you need a second listen now, Colorado fans, go check out my guy Spencer German over here at Locked On Browns, because your boy Shedeur Sanders is a Cleveland Brown. Spencer, thank you for joining me. I'm sure you had an eventful weekend, because obviously me and you were on the same wavelength. We did a show on your end where it was like, we're talking about Shedeur to the Browns at 3. We're talking Shedeur to the Browns possibly at like 32 or whatever pick, or 33, whatever pick you guys had in the second round. But I don't think either of us expected Shedeur to the Browns at 144 in the 5th round. So sort of talk to me about your initial reaction to that, his fall in general.
Yeah, it was definitely an eventful weekend, especially with the. I mean, it started really with a bang when the Browns traded back from 2, obviously, and didn't take Travis Hunter, who I know, like you alluded to, we had talked about that, right? Like, he's probably going to be the guy 2 for them, and then what that meant later on, you know, how it could all play out. Could they end up with Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter? As it turns out, they probably could have, because of how far Shedeur Sanders fell. But listen, like I think we can get into like why the Browns took him, obviously, but for reasons why he fell. My understanding is, and this is like more of an NFL thing than it is just a Browns thing, but my understanding is I think there's so much that comes with Shedeur. There's the link to his dad, which I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because it is an NFL Hall of Famer. Like, I think people have a lot of respect for Deion, but I also think understand, like, if something happens within your organization revolving around Shedeur Sanders, he will chime in on it. And then that becomes this lightning rod of a topic, and you're in the news and whatever. And I think there are probably teams that did want to stay away from that. But more so, it feels like it was about this pre-draft process and how Shedeur maybe handled certain things, how teams maybe handled certain things. I always hate the anonymous sourcing that goes on, where it's a lot of mudslinging and saying, like, this guy just he's bad character or whatever. And so, yes, there was a lot of, I think, that going on, where Shedeur sort of had his character called into question, and people saying he wasn't, he was too brash and arrogant. And I sort of felt differently about it. I felt like it was just his way he shows confidence. And so I think at the end of the day, like, that kind of came back to bite him. I've also heard that in his meetings, there were certain teams he met with that he just, like, the recalling of certain things didn't go well, where it's like they run it, they show you a play and you got to recall different things that they're asking you to sort of check. And he couldn't necessarily do that well. So I think there's a number of reasons here, but I think the biggest thing, because like you and me sitting here saying, we think he's going to go here, or any of the draft analysts out there that think he was going to go to at a certain spot. The biggest disconnect is we're not in those meetings. Like, the NFL teams have another level of a connection that they make with these players beyond just watching the tape, which all of us do. And so that seemed to be the thing that really made, or in this case broke, Shedeur in terms of where he was going to go, because they had more information, these teams did, than what the experts and analysts did. And that's, I think, why you saw such a massive discrepancy between where we thought he was going to go and where he ultimately ended up going in the 5th round of the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I think his pre-draft process combined with the teams that needed a quarterback, it got complicated, right? You look at, like you mentioned, the pre-draft process. I was told the same things. I've asked around, because I'm like, okay, tell me exactly what happened, because I want to say 2 months ago, he was the betting favorite to go number 1 overall over Cam Ward, who was the number 1 pick. And then all of a sudden he's not even falling. He's like plummeting down the draft board. Mel Kiper is literally having an aneurysm on national television, like yelling at Louis Riddick. And Louis is like, I agree with you. And Mel's just like screaming at him. Like, it was like a whole thing, a whole bizarre thing. And then the prank call factors into like the whole bizarre process. But when I talk about the teams that needed quarterbacks, it gets complicated, because the Browns were kind of viewed as one, but at the same time, they had Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett. The Steelers were viewed as one, but at the same time, they're viewed as being a Aaron Rodgers sort of potential landing spot, even though we don't know if Aaron Rodgers has any interest of ever touching a football again. But I think the Steelers are willing to take that risk. And so that kind of eliminates those teams in a way, or can eliminate them. And then the Giants, it was obviously came out that they were one of the teams that was not impressed with him in the pre-draft process. That was a landing spot. So after those three teams all have situations where it's like, do we need a quarterback or do we need Shedeur? It got a lot more murky. And so then he continues to fall. And Spencer, you know this as well as anyone. Once you fall out of the first or second round as a prospect who's viewed specifically a quarterback, you're no longer being drafted as a starter, right? You're being drafted as a potential backup. And you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. When you draft Shedeur Sanders, you get the Sanders brand, you get the Sanders family. And in essence, that means, like you said, if something goes wrong and he tells his dad, and then his dad tweets, they're not treating my son right, or they're doing this to my son, then the heat gets ramped all the way up. And so you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but let's really focus on that now, where it's like, do you think teams were a little scared to draft him or hesitant in those third and fourth rounds once it's like, okay, this is backup quarterback territory?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it got the most surprising to me was like at that point, third round and beyond, what did you have to lose? And Andrew Berry, after they drafted Shedeur, talked about how one of the biggest things for them was where the value of the pick, right? Like where they were drafting him in the fifth round. Why not at that point? Because you're getting a guy that was graded as a second rounder by many teams at the very least. And now he was available to you in the fifth round. So of course you should take a chance on that guy. Like it was weird that he wasn't like he didn't end up being a day two guy. I was so confused by that. I do think, I think there's a level of this that became the NFL just kind of trying to, I don't want to say they colluded. That would be, I think, a bridge too far to call it that. But I think this was NFL teams kind of trying to prove a point and make sure Shedeur understood like he has to earn his keep here in the NFL. Like it's not just going to be given to him. Again, I'm not trying to say like these owners all got together and said like we're not going to take this kid. I just think it became about, hey, you didn't take the pre-draft process maybe as seriously as some teams hoped. And maybe, he wasn't very good at certain elements of the pre-draft process and he rubbed some people the wrong way. And so they tried to kind of make it clear, like you might be a pretty talented player, but you also have to kind of earn your place. And that's the thing, like as a fifth round pick, he's not going to have to earn everything that he has in front of him. Like, cause to your point, he's going to come in as a backup quarterback. Like this isn't something where he's just going to be handed the job now. He wasn't taken in the first round where it's like more of a path for him to sort of start immediately. So as everyone talks about like him getting away from Deion and sort of being his own man and separating himself from that, he's going to have every opportunity to kind of do that and prove who he is as a player. And I think that's probably good for him. I also think he has a chance to be really successful at it too. Because I just think the way he plays football is I think he's a good football player. And I think he's a good fit as well for Kevin Stefanski's offense and what the Browns want to do.
Yeah, and I think another point that's getting overlooked a ton and probably needs to be at least circled or highlighted is the fact that which his brother was never really a contender for being a top draft pick by any means, and hit where he ended up, he signed with the Bucks, didn't really surprise me, but they didn't have agents, or they didn't have an agent, right? They were kind of represented by Deion Sanders, and I mean, Lamar Jackson doesn't have an agent. There's guys out there who do it, right? It's not impossible. It's not like people have done it before. But that being said, and I think it's Peter Schrager on the broadcast who made this as a point. It's like, okay, it's day 2 or day 3. Normally, your agent is like on the horn going, hey, I know we talked at this meeting, like maybe we can like discuss things or like refix that friendship or that partnership, where it's like maybe the Browns liked him more than Dillon Gabriel, but they're like, you know what? We're kind of iffy on him. And if they had an agent, maybe it could have been like, hey, Spencer, like, I know the meeting didn't go that well that first time, but we're really dedicated to this. Like, he understands where he went wrong. And so I think that was also a factor that really hurt Shedeur, was everything how they addressed the pre-draft process tells me that they were not getting the right information, honestly. Like, whoever was feeding Deion Sanders the information, it tells me that it wasn't possibly 100% correct or accurate, because obviously they handled it as if they were going round 1, pick 5 at worst, right? They were throwing out the idea of like, hey, we're going to pick what team he goes to. There's certain teams I don't want him to go to. It was like, hey, I'm not going to participate at the East-West Shrine Bowl. I'm not going to participate at the Big 12 Pro Day. I'm not going to participate at the NFL Scouting Combine, which, I mean, you don't have to, but it could have helped him looking back now, right? I think I forgot who said it, but there was a GM that said I think it was a Jags GM. They were talking about a different player, but I feel like it applies here. They talked about at a thing like the Senior Bowl, which granted he went to the Shrine Bowl, but same thing, in a way, you get to see these guys compete in person one time. Because for the most part, I don't think people realize this, a lot of GMs and coaches aren't like absolutely dialed into college football throughout the year. Like they're not always tuning in on Saturday at 9:30 p.m.
That's why
to
they have
watch
scouts,
Colorado.
obviously.
Yeah, you're right. And so I don't think people realize that. And so some people are like, they should have seen him by then. And it's like, maybe this certain GM hadn't seen him play a lot, right? Maybe they see clips or something. But if you think every NFL coach and GM is tuning in to Friday night at 9:30 to watch him play Colorado State, like it's not happening. And so I think maybe the pre-draft info that the Sanders camp was receiving may have been a little misconstrued. Would you flirt with that idea?
I think so. And in many respects, it was kind of unfair to, I think, Shedeur, just how he was represented. But I'm sure he had some role in that to an extent. And he was asked point blank on the conference call we had with him, do you regret anything for the process? And he said, no, this is my journey, and he's going to make the most of it. And I think that sort of speaks to the type of person that he is, though. And then I'll say this, like, as much as his character was questioned throughout this process, I already think that he has sort of shown a lot about who he is as a person in the days since being drafted. Between, I think the prank call thing, and I said this on Monday's episode of Locked On Browns, I actually think that that's helped him, because his responses to that whole ordeal and saying, hey, we're all kids, sometimes we do stupid things, I didn't really think much of it, it was just a negative moment, I don't really care. And then the fact that, like, he was accepting of the apology that was sent his way, and he's basically downplayed it. I think that's played a role in how the NFL's treated it. Like they said, there's no further punishment coming, all these different things. I think I think because of how he received that, and he was so willing to just kind of like let it go and forgive the kid. I think that speaks to, why it's being handled the way that it's handled, but also that tells you a lot about his character after a situation where he's been sort of dragged through the mud in some respects, where now he's showing you, like, hey, this is who I really am. Like, I'm a forgiving person. I'm focused on football. I'm ready to come to work and all these different things. So I think these first couple of days, even publicly, his image has been, and also I think the prank call thing also added a level of sympathy, people feeling bad for Shedeur that he didn't get, that he was kind of misrepresented or misunderstood, and also maybe told he was going to go somewhere where he wasn't. So I think all of that has kind of led to people now, after the draft is over, feeling like, okay, now he's got a chance to earn it. And maybe he's gotten some people on his side now to root for him because of how this all went. But definitely was a weird process for Shedeur Sanders, given what he was talked about as at the early on in this pre-draft conversation, and where he actually ended up going.
Yeah, and I think the prank call thing, that's a great point, honestly. I hadn't even thought about it like that. But the prank call, I don't think people understand how brutal it was. He was drafted 100 and I think 4 picks later. Like that was, the Saints were picking at 40 for what ended up being Tyler Shuck. And so totally, that prank call had me infuriated. Not just about Shedeur. Tyler Warren got the same thing. The UConn offensive lineman, his name's slipping my mind, he got prank called a few times. And I just think I expected there to be a punishment, just because I feel like it needs to set a precedent. Like, hey, this can't happen. Like, we are the NFL, and like we can't have, like, if people, which I don't ever condone it, but if people somehow get someone's number, like, that's out of your control. But like having that happen where he gets it off an NFL iPad is just ridiculous in my opinion. But it sounds like Shedeur has absolutely nailed the pre-draft or the post-draft process for the Browns. When we come back, we're going to talk about the quarterback situation in Cleveland, because Spencer, it's a little complicated. This episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you could be a part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when the demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. I'm joined by Spencer German of Locked On Browns. Spencer, we kind of talked about it a little bit, right? He's nailed his, I guess, first 3 days on the job, or first 2.5 days on the job. But let's talk about the quarterback situation. First of all, walk me through what the Browns relayed to you and the rest of the media there. Why did they go Dillon Gabriel, then Shedeur? What was the motivation behind that?
I think the biggest thing that became pretty clear from the press conferences they held and all that was that they just really liked Dillon Gabriel. For whatever reason, we can question it. I questioned it. I think everybody in our respective media room questioned it. Nobody really knows why they preferred him. Oh, I shouldn't say nobody knows why. I think there's a lot of factors there. I think when you watch Dillon Gabriel though, and you understand like his stature, he's a shorter guy, 5'11". But they liked the fact that, similar to Shedeur, he was a very consistent passer, high completion percentage, obviously second all time in passing yards in college football, most starts for a quarterback in college football history. So he's durable. Mm-hmm. He played a lot of football. He's seen a lot of things. I think they felt like his arm strength, while not the strongest, was adequate enough where he can make all the throws.
Yeah.
And they had a really good meeting with him, by all accounts, in Eugene. I think they actually met with him prior to going to Colorado's pro day. I think it was like they went to Eugene, met with him, and then they went to Colorado and met with Shedeur and Travis. And so it sounds like there was, a lot of due diligence done on him, and that Kevin Stefanski, maybe most of all, really liked him. So I think that's why they took him there. That's the only thing I can think is the case as to why they would use a third-round pick on somebody who was more so considered a consensus like 4th, 5th, 6th round guy potentially. So they must have loved him that much that he was up higher on their board. And then when it sort of came full circle and Shedeur was still there, they decided, well, the Via was too good to pass up, so let's take him too.
Yeah, I think it was interesting really to go quarterback, because if you look at, it's kind of funny, if you look at the ESPN tracker of positions or the positional drafts, it goes Dillon Gabriel, no quarterback is taken until the 5th round, Shedeur Sanders, and it's the Browns both times. And the Browns took a little bit of heat for their 2 running back, 2 quarterback situation, but if that's what they feel is fit, then by all means, go for it. Another question I had, and I think this was asked at the press conference, and social media is obviously a big proponent to everything. And I don't think people realize, and this is someone who's worked in TV before, I don't think people realize how far behind anything live being broadcasted is, right? So like even the announcers at the football games, like they're ahead of what we're seeing on the broadcast. I think it was pretty obvious when people are picked. It's like, okay, Spencer's been drafted, and Spencer's just sitting there like this because like they're still processing, right? Like it hasn't happened. And so when the Browns selected Shedeur Sanders, the meeting room wasn't ecstatic looking. Now, was that, I know they addressed it, so I wanted you to sort of talk about it. Was that like right after? Was that completely after? Like, had the moment already passed? What did they say about that moment?
So their response was, and I think it's fair, that when that camera cuts to them, they're not fully aware of when that's going to happen. Right. And it's not always like when the pick is being made. So I think people do need to keep that in mind. I have not read too much into like the how they looked in that moment. Now I know like there's people in the background clapping and people pointed to that like, well, they were celebrating. Why wasn't Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski celebrating? So I do think, I understand why people jump to that conclusion. I didn't make a huge deal out of that because I like you, I understand sometimes you can't account for when they're going to cut to that camera shot that they have in the war rooms and all those different things. And I think they did a pretty good job of dousing water on that one, even though I'm sure there's some people out there who don't believe them. So yeah, I just think it was kind of like a caught at the wrong time type thing. I don't think it had anything to do with like whether or not they really wanted Shedeur or they didn't like the pick or the owner having influence or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because that was also a conspiracy that Jimmy Haslam was just like on the phone like, hey, this is my pick now. So
I talked about that on today's podcast too.
Yeah.
Listen, is there a chance it was him? I think there's probably a possibility it could be him because he's done that before. My point more so than anything is like if it was him, like him interjected himself for a 5th round pick for a guy probably should have gone on day 2 isn't really the end of the world, even if it sort of makes the Browns draft look a little funky because they took 2 quarterbacks within 50 picks of each other. So I don't know for sure if he did or not. They said he didn't. You never know if they're like, telling you the truth or not at these press conferences. So who knows? But my larger point was meant to be that if he did interject himself, it's not really that big of a deal because I think Shedeur Sanders is the type of player that would have been worth doing something like that for in the 5th round.
Yeah, especially when you consider the value of the pick. Like Shedeur there, and I mean it's tough for Shedeur, I guess, if he was expecting to go top 5 where they're all getting paid $40 million. But I wrote a story that where his projection was like the 40 to 42 million range, and now he's going to be paying, I think it's like a total of $4 million over 4 years, right? So he loses a lot of money, but for the Browns, hell of a value, right? You're getting a top tier personality, top tier possible quarterback for really cheap. But let's talk about the quarterback room. Deshaun Watson is he's a non-factor. I saw Jonathan Jones of CBS say he'll never play for the Browns again. They have Joe Flacco, who's like 106, but also sometimes really good. They have Kenny Pickett, who they made a move for. They have Dillon Gabriel, who they drafted ahead of Shedeur. And then they have Shedeur. So they have we'll call it 4 quarterback horse race. Let's talk about that quarterback situation. How do you see that unfolding? How did they address that?
So obviously this is the next big part of this conversation, right? Is how this all sort of sorts itself out. First of all, I'm not surprised. I wasn't overly surprised they took 2 quarterbacks. And I think they were going to do it 50 picks within each other. No, like I would have thought my last mock draft, I actually had them take 2 quarterbacks, but that was when they had 10 picks and like 4 6-rounders. And my thought process was, okay, they will take somebody like Jalen Milroe in like the 3rd round and take a chance. And then in like the 6th round, they'll get I think I had him taking like Curtis Rourke or something like that. Like it was like a random sort of back into the class quarterback. And so I'm not surprised they took 2 because they usually carry 4 quarterbacks throughout the offseason anyway. And so this is pretty normal from a standpoint of how the Browns build their room. The real question is going to become, okay, when you get through training camp and the preseason, who emerges as the guys who actually make the roster and who are you moving on from? I feel hard pressed to think Dillon Gabriel is somebody that they would cut ties with after using a 3rd round pick on them. If they used a 3rd round pick on Dillon Gabriel and then they were to just like try to get him to the practice squad, that would be that would basically be like an admission that you didn't make a very good pick there. So I think he's probably safe by nature of where they picked him.
Okay.
I can't like Shedeur is interesting because they did use a draft pick on him, and I think they generally want to give their draft picks time to figure things out, and they want to give them time to develop. But as a 5th round pick, you know how this works. Like in the NFL, you're hit or miss. Like you're competing for a roster spot. So not to say Shedeur's talent isn't better than a 5th overall pick or a 5th round pick, but just like he's going to have to sort of prove that he belongs in this room essentially as the guy who was a 5th round pick. And then the other 2 guys with Flacco and Pickett, because Deshaun, who you brought up there, probably isn't going to play this season. So, and you said it was Jonathan Jones, I think, right? Who said, to his point, he's probably played his last snap with the Browns. We'll see how that shakes out next offseason. But to me, this kind of comes down to who wins the job outright out of camp I think it's probably going to be between Flacco and Pickett to start the season. And whoever doesn't win that job, maybe they become somebody that gets floated in trade talks, right? You try to get like some sort of pick for that person. And the Browns have done this pretty much the last 2 straight summers, where at the end of training camp, you got to cut the roster down to 53. Andrew Berry 2 years ago traded Josh Dobbs to the Cardinals and got a 5th round pick out of it in 2023. And then in 2024, this past year, there was rumors he was floating Jameis Winston to teams that maybe wanted to get a veteran quarterback. And they also tried to trade Tyler Huntley, and then they ended up just having to cut one. But it was so I think that's kind of how this is setting up. Is we'll just see what happens during camp. Whoever wins the job outright, he's going to be our starter. We'll have the 2 rookies behind him, and then we'll maybe try to trade the other guy and get some sort of draft capital in return.
Yeah, I think the NFL works in crazy ways, dude. Like the fact that that's kind of like their trend is like, hey, we're going to take 4. We're going to trade someone who everyone would probably be fine with like signing as a free agent anyway. But someone may buy it. Like, right. You never know. Preseason injuries, like say the Vikings, like JJ McCarthy last year, say they didn't have Sam Darnold, right? They'd be a perfect candidate for a guy like Jameis Winston or Kenny Pickett or whoever it is. So it sounds like, at least from the way you broke it down, that Shedeur is in essence battling for the 3rd string spot at the moment, or a 2nd string spot at best.
And that's my feel on it. Well, again, we haven't seen them throw a single pass at practice. So we don't know anything about how they're structuring this thing, what they look like, how they're going to look on the field. But sitting here today, like a couple of days removed from the pick itself, Andrew Berry loves to give his picks time to sort of develop. So I'd be hard pressed to think they move on from any of the guys either of the guys they drafted, and they would try to keep both of them. And so that just the natural sort of progression in that thought is, okay, so who's going to get traded? And it feels like it'd be more likely that it's Flacco or Pickett for some team that might need a starter in a pinch than the 2 rookies that I think they'll probably try to at least see what they can get out of in a year that's probably mostly about building towards 2026 anyway, when they likely are going to try to take a franchise quarterback, because they did set themselves up to do that. So they owe it to themselves to play both those rookies too and get a sense of, can one of these guys be our franchise guy, or are we going to be back in the quarterback conversation for the 2026 draft?
And then one final question before we move on to how Shedeur can succeed. And this is a theory that I've been shopping in my head, or workshopping in my head, excuse me. Does he get the Tim Tebow, Johnny Manziel treatment, where they keep him on the roster? I mean, Johnny Manziel was obviously a first-round pick, but yeah, Tim Tebow was drafted fairly early, I think third, if I'm not mistaken, second-round pick. But does he get that treatment where he's Tim Tebow, Johnny Manziel, where everyone's excited about him, and he gets a roster spot out of pure excitement from fans? Like, do you think that his brand, his personality helps him stay on the roster?
I don't think this organization operates that way. I see. I shouldn't say that though, because there was so much said last year about the fact that they purposely didn't bring back Joe Flacco last year because they were worried about how it would vibe with Deshaun Watson if he struggled, like what fans would say. So I think they do think about those things to an extent. Like they understand optics of things and whatever. But no, I don't think he's guaranteed anything at this point in terms of, hey, just because the fans are going to be excited about you, you're going to be here. And I think that kind of goes back to the ownership part of this too. Did he make the pick because he's trying to sell tickets? I don't think it's about that necessarily. I think they liked him to enough that when he slipped that far, they were like, we got to get him, and they're going to give him a chance here to compete. And I do think because of what he does from a skill set standpoint, he could potentially earn this job at some point or get a chance to play at some point. And actually have a pretty successful career here in Cleveland, depending on how things kind of shake out the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting, and I think of Tim Tebow on the Patriots. Honestly, I think Shedeur has a way higher ceiling, and I personally still think he could be a starter in the NFL. Yeah. But I don't know if everyone remembers when Tim Tebow was on the Patriots, he would be on a practice field by himself, and the media would be watching him over the rest of the team, right? Because he was just that polarizing. So I will be curious to see how Shedeur is covered.
He will be polarizing, I'll say that, and there's going to be a lot of coverage about him, especially from the media, in an open quarterback competition for sure. And yeah, I think the thing I'll say on it is the one thing that I do think is going to be interesting is if he makes the roster, if he's not a practice squad guy, what will how will fans react to a bad Flacco game, right, or a bad Kenny Pickett game? Will it instantly be you got to get Shedeur out there? Because we've seen that in this town. You bring up Johnny Manziel. When he was here, the second things went south with Brian Hoyer and he started playing poorly, it was get Johnny Manziel out there. The outside pressures of fans trying to force a rookie quarterback to start is something that has happened here before. So that'll be something I think to keep an eye on once we get closer to the season.
Yeah, as someone who, for my writing role, I cover Texas very closely. Quinn Ewers would throw one interception, and everyone was like, "Okay, yeah, it's Arch Manning time." Right? It's very much a possibility. And I think any team who takes him knows that's a possibility. When we come back, we're going to talk about how Shedeur can succeed, whether it's just as making a roster spot or finding his way into the starting role. But a first break. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving you new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel, you can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love FanDuel because it makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player prop. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. Appreciate you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen. Joined by Spencer German of Locked On Browns. Spencer, let's just cut right to the chase. So what does Shedeur need to do to stick on the roster? And then what does he need to do to earn that starting spot in Cleveland?
I think number one is just be himself, play his game. The things that he does well, and he's talked about this himself, are the things that the Browns want in a quarterback. They flat out started this all season by saying, when they hired Tommy Rees as their offense coordinator, decision-making is the number one thing they want in a quarterback. And lo and behold, a week later at the Shrine Bowl, there was Shedeur Sanders saying that he thinks his decision-making is the thing he does best. So, and I think the tape certainly speaks to that, right? Despite the fact that he played behind a shaky offensive line, there were some issues there. He didn't have the talent of, an Ohio State or an Alabama around him at the skill positions. Yes, he had Travis Hunter, but it wasn't like he had this star-studded wealth of talent around him, and he was still able to make plays. He was able to make, lemonade out of lemons at times. And even though he doesn't have like the best athleticism, he still made plays with his legs when he needed to and was able to kind of get out of trouble. I know one thing that people didn't like is that he sort of drifts back more often than he sort of steps up in the pocket. So there's some things that he has to work on. But I do think like the game itself is there. Like he sees the field well, makes good decisions. He didn't turn the ball over a lot despite all those circumstances that were sort of around him and limited what he was able to do and what the offense was able to do. So like I think if he just plays his game while being willing to learn, I think he has I really do think he has a chance to be successful here or just in general in the NFL. And maybe that second part is maybe the biggest thing, because after hearing everything that came out of the pre-draft process and people maybe not thinking he, could rehash certain plays or certain things that they were looking for, and that he maybe came off a little brash and all those things. If he's able to come in and just, accept the good and the bad of like criticisms and praise that he's going to get and be a sponge and let people sort of influence him in that way so that he can learn how to play the position better, then I think he's going to be totally fine. And from my, based on what I feel about Shedeur Sanders, and if you read past all like the minutia of the brash, quote unquote brash guy that people seem to see the most, I do think there's a person in there and a player in there who wants to learn and be his own person and kind of get out from his dad's shadow and is willing to do what it takes to be great at this level. And that would be, learning from the elders on the team, the veterans on the team, and be willing to embrace whatever sort of coaching is going to come his way as well.
Yeah, I think playing for his dad, it helped him in the sense of like it boosted his brand like infinitely, right?
Sure.
And it put him in a prime position to succeed. No pun intended there with the prime part, but it put him in a position to succeed. But now everyone's question is, can he play for someone who's not his dad? And so I think, like you said, if he shows up and he's coachable and like he's the rookie that's carrying Joe Flacco's pads or whatever, like carrying someone's water or picking up the donuts in the morning, like if he is showing constantly that like I could be a coachable guy who's not me, which I don't think he was, but I think that's how he comes off to people who don't. Like if you just look at Shedeur Sanders, you go, he's Deion's son, his dad was the coach, he's confident, and he knows he's good. I think people just like put all those together and they're like, he's cocky, he's uncoachable. Like that's when you start getting like these rumors, these notions. And so I think if he could show he's coachable, show he could be a part of a team that's not centered around him, I think he has a bright future in the NFL, right? And I think you kind of hinted at it. You said in the NFL, and I'm not casting a prediction for you by any means, but there's not a 100% guarantee that Shedeur gets his chance with the Browns, right? It could be a point where he has to make it work somewhere else. And so I think as long as he's willing to embrace the hustle, embrace the challenge, he'll be fine, right? I think he's more than proven this before, and I feel like we forget this, but he was a 4-star recruit, but a low-ranked 4-star recruit. He's going to FAU, flips to Jackson State, completely revamps that program. I think the common college football fan wasn't aware of Jackson State in general. And then he goes to Colorado, who was in the depths of college football. They were 1-11, like one of the worst teams I'd ever seen. And in 2 years, he turns them into a playoff contender. So he's used to not being in orthodox situations. So I think that can help him. Spencer, before we go, I have one final question. I guess we'll go 2 final questions. First question, a little petty, but we'll see what you have to say about it. They were picking numbers. There was a video. Quinshon Judkins appeared to ask for number 2. Was Shedeur on the team at that point?
He was. Well,
Okay.
Actually, I guess I don't know the exact timeline because those guys were in the building before. So what's funny about when the Shedeur situation happened was all 3 of those guys, the 3 picks from Friday, they were all except for Dillon Gabriel. He was the 4th, but he lives in Hawaii, so they hadn't gotten him into town yet, so we didn't get a chance to talk to him. But Carson Schlesinger, Quinshon Judkins, and Harold Fannin were all in the building like whole day, morning, sort of leading up to. And then they were at their press conference, like in the media room with us. And that's when the news that they traded up for Shedeur came down. So I kind of felt bad because they didn't really get the best introductory press conference because everybody in the media room was like then turning their focus towards, oh my gosh, they just traded up for Shedeur Sanders. So I don't know if that happened before that press conference or after that press conference. But yeah, I know Quinshon wanted the number 2. Is that what you were going to kind of go with this? Is that he was asking for number 2? So yeah, I don't know if I will say the coach in that video, who I forget who it was, he made a comment like we saved 0 through 19 for quarterbacks just until the draft's done. So he might have his number sort of reserved there. And there's no 2 on the team right now. So there's a chance that he can still get his number 2. But I don't know. Maybe this is a 5th round pick situation where they're like, you got to earn the number 2. We'll see how it goes.
Interesting. I saw the video and I was like, this is going to cause a lot of drama because at the same time, we had no idea when this was, right? Like that could have been Monday or Tuesday morning, whenever the day was, right? So whole process there. Spencer,
I think it was definitely Saturday. It was just when on Saturday. I don't know if it was before they actually had acquired him or if it was after they had drafted him. So that's the big mystery. But yes,
people were ready to get feisty on social media. They were ready. Spencer, tell the people where they could find you and keep up with your Shedeur Sanders coverage, because we're now passing the baton to you in a way. Like he is now part of your content.
Yeah, I think I messaged you and I said, well, hey, I guess we'll be doing shows together in the future because I'm sure you'll have plenty to talk about when Shedeur Sanders gets his first start or has a good game or whatever. So, but yeah, you can find me at the Twitter handle below there. And then, of course, there's this with the Locked On Browns podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, at my own Locked On Browns YouTube channel. I'm 2 for 2 since Shedeur's been drafted, making him part of the conversation. So you can find out more about what I think about Shedeur Sanders and to sit with the Browns over there. And I appreciate you guys catching me over here as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys for tuning in, making Locked On Buffs your first listen of the day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. And I will see you guys tomorrow with more draft coverage. There are more people were drafted than Shedeur Sanders, but obviously the biggest stories we had to talk about. Hope all of you have a great day.